So I stumbled upon the quilt because my friend, Andy, who was with me on the day of the memorial display in the park, and was like, oh, I think the AIDS quilt memorial is today. And we both were like, if we can find a place to park, we will go and see it. And we happened to find a spot right in front of the park, which I lived here for 2 years and that has never happened. Yeah, we stumbled in and I was taken aback by the sheer just volume, the mileage, and it wasn't until after we left and I got home that I sort of processed, and it really impacted me in this very deeply emotional and upsetting way. There was just this heartbreak that I felt in the air, that I felt was really palpable, and the celebration of all these lives. You have extreme sadness mixed with extreme just admiration and celebration. My Uncle John passed of AIDS-related Hodgkin's lymphoma the year I was born, and all that I grew up knowing about him was that he was a media teacher and he went to NYU and he taught high school, and he passed away at 28. And he bought me my first stroller. My uncle is such an important figure, one, because he was at least one of very few people in my family who was gay and who was out. And I came out in college, and there was a part of me that wished he had been there for that process. And this summer in particular, I've been out for like 8 years and I've never really struggled with it. I've always been very open and proud, and I talk to my students about it, and I think representation's really important. And this was the first time where I felt these very complex feelings about it of, oh, it is kind of hard. And, there are these other parts of it that make it a sort of tough way to live. I wish my Uncle John was here so that I could talk to him about it, to see how he worked through these things. And this year sort of catapulted that. I think when I saw the quilts and I talked with my family and I realized he didn't have one, and I just felt like it was important to honor him and tell his story. The quilt has been a slow process because I wanted to do it right. I wanted to do it justice. And what I mean by that is I had this very small snippet of who this person was, and I didn't feel it was true to him as an entire person to just put on his quilt, John Cherney, uncle, son, brother, teacher. It didn't feel authentic to who he was or me. And I reached out to his old students, and I reached out to colleagues, and I reached out to his best friends who, were his best friends up until he passed away. And really gained a lot of different perspectives on who he was. And I learned that he was also really complicated and did struggle with being gay and didn't have the biggest support system and struggled with substance abuse and all of these parts of him that we didn't know. And I remember my dad saying to me, Sarah, you know more about my brother than I ever did. And that made me sad and made me feel like I was doing something that was important. Every time I sit down to plan it, I'm like, okay, how am I going to encapsulate this gigantic person in this little space? In order to really do this panel, aside from getting to know my uncle on a deeper level, I really wanted to learn as much as I could about sort of the highest point in the AIDS crisis, and I watched as many documentaries as I could. I also read Cleve Jones's book, and about his experience in the movement, and I think that also gave me a perspective that I didn't have before. It's just helped me going into, I think, making the quilt, of feeling like I've done my due diligence as far as really learning what these people went through. And I think I needed to go through that and watch and listen and read and really learn about the impact to also do this panel justice. You know, as the generations move on, there's going to be less and less people, I think, who had such a direct connection. I see the AIDS Quilt Memorial as this living historical artifact. I think, you know, in order for things to not happen again, you have to know your past and your history, and teaching about what was done and what wasn't done and how could we have done it better, and if this happens again, what could we do? I think that that's all really important and informs how we tackle other epidemics that come up. I think activism comes in many different shapes and sizes. I think that quilt making is activism. I think I've struggled with this question because during the racial reckoning that we had, and after George Floyd passed away and we had all those protests, I had a very hard time being front and center at every protest. And it was a really horrible experience, and I didn't feel effective. I was really scared. I had my own feelings about the police, but it was very scary being so close to them. And I also am a professional. I'm a teacher, and I can't afford to get arrested. And so I think I struggled a lot with this idea of, I care about this so much. I want to do something. Maybe standing on the front lines is not the way that I help. The best part about making this quilt for my uncle, first and foremost, was learning about who he was. I think also being able to take what I've learned about him and almost transfer it into this creative process. I think for me, being able to express myself through creativity is very cathartic, and it's how I express how I'm feeling. And this was a very direct way of taking all this factual information and being like, okay, let me take this factual information and, you know, make it into this creative project that also, at the same time, while I'm learning, I get to honor my family and I get to honor my uncle, and I also get to teach the people in my life about this person.